We're talking about defensive detachment and faith today. One of the most like enlightening things I learned about myself at the Living Wisdom course that I went to with Jess was that I defensively detached from my parents super early in life, probably around the age of 5 or 6. Defensive detachment is like a coping mechanism where a young child decides that they can no longer trust their parents or whoever the big person in their life is, because they've been hurt too much or let down too often. It's like a self-protection strategy. So if I never trust anyone again, because trusting people always gets me hurt, then and never be vulnerable with anyone, then no one can hurt me again, right? And that's the kind of like thinking or the reasoning behind it. Even though like that doesn't go through a child's mind, that's what happens. And it can result from abuse, neglect, rejection, being repeatedly ignored or misjudged by a parent, favoritism, parental anger, alcohol and substance abuse. So the list just goes on, right? And or the parent could simply be absent, whether it's from work or incarceration or hospitalization or divorce. That can result in it as well. And it's like an artificial orphanhood where a child detaches from their parents because being attached to them is too painful or too dangerous. But the result is like you still need nurture and support, but you don't want it because of the hurt and betrayal that you've experienced. And Dave Riddell likened it to a battery being pulled out of the plug before it was fully charged, or before it was ready. That's a kind of analogy. And after learning about this, a lot of the struggles I had throughout my life started to make sense. It was like really like like that's why I do that kind of like moment, right? And it made sense why I struggled to ask for help and why I struggled to receive help, or I used to anyway. I'd like rather walk the long way around than use a pedestrian crossing and make other cars stop for me. I'd rather walk up and down every aisle of the supermarket rather than just ask a staff member, "Hey, where's this?" And it took a long time for me to accept help from Jessie as well. Even if it was something as simple as her getting me a glass of water, I would be like, "Oh, no, I'll do it myself." And it made sense why I react with disgust to compliments and encouragements, especially if it comes from older male authority figures. And that happened at Living Wisdom when Dave Riddell gave me a compliment, and I was like, "Ooh!" Like in my head, I was like, "Ooh, get away from me!" Like, yeah. My reaction isn't, "Oh, that's so encouraging. I feel so warm and fuzzy." It's literally like, bleh. um. So it all started to make sense, why I struggled with friendships and intimate relationships. And I would be okay first meeting people. Like you're supposed to be strangers, right? So it's fine. But as soon as like time kind of went past a little bit, and I was like supposed to be more familiar with people, I would feel a strong desire inside myself to pull away. And I've ghosted a lot of people in my life. A lot of unanswered messages on my phone, even to this day. It's something I'm still working on too, right? But like whenever I would start to know people more, mainly when I felt like people were starting to know me more, I felt like I had a spidey sense inside me, like there was imminent danger. Like if these people find out what I'm really like, they're gonna reject me, and that's too painful. And therefore, my response is, I'm gonna reject you before you can reject me. That means creating or isolating myself, right? Before anyone rejects me, it's like, you can't reject me if I never joined you, right? That's the kind of response that happened. And therefore, I never got close to people, never joined a group of friends. And that sense of control, because I control if I join or not, right? So that sense of control, I thought protected me from the pain of rejection, but it actually just drove me into extreme loneliness and isolation. And I remember for years feeling so lonely, I actually physically hurt. But I still preferred the isolation. Because even though it sucked, at least it didn't feel like I was in danger all the time. And I remember watching people around me do fun things together, form friend groups together, thinking like, why can't I have that? And especially, it was like, it really got to me when, say like I met two people at the same time, and then they got really close. And then I was always the one who was like, I don't really know these people. But it was me like not letting people know me too, right? So I was creating my own predicament. Yeah, so all of that started to make sense after I learned about defensive detachment. But you see how like in those examples and what I just explained, like I feared the very thing that I needed. right? I needed community, a friendship, comfort, whatever, but I actually feared it. And that's the dilemma of defensive detachment, where you learn really young that you can't trust this good thing that you need, right? So that's why it's sometimes hard to deal with. Because how do you feed a starving man that's deathly afraid of food? Right? Every time you try to feed him, he's like, no, get that away from me. You can't really help him, right? But what about you? Do you also struggle to maintain healthy relationships, or repeatedly fall out with people, whether it be in your personal life or work? Or do you have difficulty expressing your emotions, meeting your emotional needs? Maybe you're also defensively detached, and in that area, we have not developed properly. But I just like to clarify that it's not your fault if you're defensively detached and struggle with these things, but it is your responsibility to work on yourself and make up for what you lacked. So blaming other people for your predicament helps no one. But you need to acknowledge it. You need to acknowledge the injustice of what happened, recognize that it was unfair, or you can't move on. But if you sulk in the past with a victim mentality and you're always just like, oh, that person didn't do this for me, blah, you won't move on because you refuse to. So if we go to our parents or whoever our big person was and just dump on them in a really accusatory way and say like, you did this, you didn't do that, they'll just get defensive and you'll just be hurt again. So what is the solution? How do we rebuild our ability to trust, to be vulnerable, to form healthy relationships, and to live in community with others again? And the cure, I think I found that the cure to these problems is faith in God. And at first it kind of sounds a little bit random, but let's flesh that out a little bit. Because it can just sound like empty Christian lingo, right? Just have faith. And we hear that a lot in church. Have faith, have faith. But what does that actually mean? What has faith got to do with our past hurts and inability to trust? Well, let's start by defining the word faith, right? What is faith? So the Oxford English Dictionary defines it as complete trust and confidence in someone or something. And then in the Bible in Hebrews 11, it defines it as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So then how do you have trust and confidence in someone? Helen did a really helpful talk on trust, and she said trust needs to be earned. So someone earns our trust when they continuously prove themselves to be trustworthy, when they repeatedly do what they say they will do, and if they do that for long enough, we start to trust them, right? It's about being predictable. And when we trust someone because they have proven their reliability with past performances, then we start to believe their promises for the future too, right? So if someone is like, I'll always come at 8, and every single week they come at 8 for 1 year, for the next following year where they say, I'll come at 8, you start to believe them, right? That they will come at 8, even though it hasn't happened yet. And so in that sense, you can think of faith as the future tense of trust. So where someone untrustworthy broke your trust and hurt you, you need a trustworthy person to show up and prove to you that you can trust them, that they will show up for you when they say they will, to restore your faith so you don't have to go through life like a cautious orphan anymore. And that's what defensive detachment is. It's kind of like an artificial orphanhood, where you choose to live not relying on anyone. And that's why the faith is the answer to defensive detachment. But of course, it's vitally important who you place your trust and faith in. Right? If you place it on someone untrustworthy again, you'll just get hurt again. And each time you get hurt, it'll just be harder and harder to trust again. So there's the danger that you will isolate yourself more and more, get lonelier and lonelier, and have fallout after fallout if you don't trust the right person. Which is why there's no one better to trust than God. There's no one more trustworthy than God. He never breaks his promises, and he loves you and only wants the best for you. He will never let you down. So why and how should you have faith in God? Well, let's start with why. The first reason is he has a long history of keeping his word. Right, take the Bible, right? This is not one book written by one person. So the word Bible derives from the Greek word ta biblia, which means a collection of books or a library. So this Bible is actually a collection of 66 books written by around 40 different authors, ranging from kings to prophets and priests to doctors and tax collectors, all the way down to humble fishermen. And it was written over an estimated period of around 1,500 years, right? And in this vast collection of books over such a long period of time, the Bible really is about one thing. It's about God fulfilling his promises. That's why the Bible was split up into the Old and New Testament, right? The word testament means proof or evidence of something. So in the context of the Bible, the Old Testament, well, in the context of the whole Bible, it is proof or evidence of God fulfilling his promises. We broke our relationship with God through sin. We chose to be apart from him, but he promised that he would rescue his people and provide a solution to that problem. In the Old Testament, that's what the Old Testament is. He promised a Messiah. And so everything in the Old Testament is pointing to that Messiah, which is Jesus. And we see how God rescues Israel over and over again. And it keeps pointing to the promise that God gave us, or gave the Israelites in those days. So in Genesis, where it says the snake would injure the heel of the woman's offspring, but the woman's offspring would crush the head of the serpent, that's talking about Jesus. And when God told Abraham to sacrifice his son, and then stopped him at the last minute, and Abraham named the place Jehovah Jireh, that means the Lord will provide. That's pointing to Jesus. God will provide his own son to be sacrificed for our sins, so Abraham doesn't have to sacrifice his son. And then, why is the book of Ruth in the Bible? I used to ask that. Why is this story about a random Gentile widow in the Bible? There would have been heaps of women in her situation in those days, right? But when we read the genealogies, it's because she happens to be the great-grandmother of King David. And God said the Messiah will come through that line, right? That's why she's there. All the times God saves Israel despite them repeatedly betraying him. So you see how everything is testifying to God's promise that he will provide a solution for the problem of sin and death. And then what happened? The Messiah that was promised actually came. So God said he'd do this, and then he did it. Basically, that's it. And that's what the New Testament is about. Here is the Messiah that God promised, how he fulfills all the prophecies laid out in the Old Testament. And then it said, Jesus said, I will die for you. And then he did. And he died for our sins. He became the sacrifice that was promised way back in Abraham's time. And he said he would rise again, and he did. And the New Testament is testifying to that. And also gives us a new promise of the second coming of Christ, right? And we can have faith that God will fulfill that promise because he's already fulfilled everything before that. And he's proven himself trustworthy. So that's the first reason why you should trust God. He has a track record of thousands of years where he always keeps his promises, not failing once, right? And the second reason is he simply loves you and only wants the best for you. So how do you view God? And how do you think he sees you? I believe God was all-powerful and completely just, but I viewed him as like a fair but really harsh judge, always watching me with a stern look on his face, ready to pounce and deliver his punishment on me for even the slightest mistake. And he was cold and distant. Christianity was, don't do this and do that, or else you're going to hell. But that's just not true, right? God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, and he lavishes that unfailing love to thousands of generations, forgiving the wicked, the rebellious, and the sinful. That's how he describes himself in Exodus 34. And a good picture of God's compassion and love for us, I think, is Jesse's sister Esther adopted a cat a couple years back. And I think that picture really represents God's heart towards us. So while Esther and her boyfriend Jay were living in Dunedin, they found a cat on their property. And it looked like this. I don't know if you guys can see. It was a very feral cat.
That's so scary.
Yep. Yeah, it looked like that. So, but Esther and Jay have a heart of gold. They really are, like two of the nicest people I have ever met. They took the cat in and named it Wonky. And it made sense. It would make sense if Wonky, being a feral cat, right, was at first extremely cautious of them. She didn't trust them. She didn't know them. She probably kept her distance. But they didn't get angry at her or impatient for being like that, right? They just kept feeding her, trying to give her food, showering her with love. They spent thousands and thousands of dollars on this random cat they found. And if I remember correctly, she had to have 18 teeth pulled out. And we all know how expensive dentists are. But let me tell you, animal tooth workers are no cheaper. And then they moved to Australia just last year, actually. It was last year, right, Jess? And the flight for the cat alone was more than $4,000. But they would rather pay that than give up this feral cat they found. You know, they bought it toys, all kinds of nice food, gave it cuddles, spent heaps of time playing with her, just lavishing their love on Wonky, right? They take her for walks like it's their baby, like in a backpack like this.
Oh my god.
Right? And when me and Jess visited them in Australia, you walk into the house and it seems like it was furnished for the cat, not for people, because there's cat towers everywhere. There's like this tunnel thing that the cat can run in. There's even like a big shed thing in the backyard for the cat. So why do they do this for Wonky, right? Wonky doesn't serve them. It doesn't earn them money. If anything, drains their bank account like crazy. It doesn't cook their dinners. They actually have to feed her. Doesn't do their taxes. Being a cat, she probably looks at them with disdain. It's like, you know, serve me, my humans. You know, kind of like almost that kind of attitude. But they do it just because they love her, right? There are no conditions. They just love her. And it's not about what the cat can do for them. They just love being with her. They don't have a quiz for the cat at the end of each day. So how much do you know us? And if you don't pass the test, we'll kick you out. There's no list of rules like don't do this, don't do that, or we'll kick you out. But sometimes we view God that way, right? We think God is there like, oh, you didn't follow rule 1, 2, 3, therefore you're going to hell. That's not how it is, right? And just letting them help her would have filled their hearts with joy. When this feral cat came and finally responded to their love and care, and she finally came close to them, when she first let them pet her, and when she first ate food out of their hand, them seeing her just thrive, seeing her lounge around on the couch without having to worry about where her next meal was coming from, that alone makes all the time and money they spend on her worth it. And this is Wonky's life today, just lying around, right?
Is that another cat?
No, it's the same cat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are there two cats in that?
Yeah, it's the same cat. 2 pictures. She just eats and then sleeps and then has fun. And I think that's God's heart towards us. You know, nothing fills his heart with more joy than when we turn to him. He doesn't need you to do anything for him. He just wants to be with you, enjoy your company, and just enjoy existing together. But how do we have faith in God in practical terms? You know, what if you have difficulty having faith in God, like I did? And, well, how do you develop trust and faith in anyone? It's the same process. The answer isn't to simply try harder. Just strain that faith muscle until your knuckles turn white and you're out of breath. That's not what having faith means. You simply just have to get to know them. It would be unreasonable for someone you just met to demand you trust them. Like if I just met Jess, it's my first day knowing her, and I demand she trusts me, or why should she? Right? That's a valid question. You don't know them. God is a reasonable God. He doesn't demand blind trust and then punish you when you don't trust him. No, he's willing to prove to you that he's trustworthy. The Bible says, he says in the Bible, come let us reason together. You can reason with him. You can wrestle with him, actually. The question is, are you willing to take that step and let God show you he's trustworthy? You can be like Wonky, you know, take a small step first. You don't have to just come a little bit closer and check out what these humans are trying to offer. Check out what God's offering. Just have a taste. You don't have to move in straight away and go to Australia like she did. God is patient and he is kind and he will answer all your questions. He doesn't force his will on anyone. And that's been my personal experience. One of the effects of my defensive detachment is that I have a distrust of authority, including with God. So when I hear things like have faith in church, and it's like have faith, believe in God, you know, my response is to kind of like cross my arms and with an emotionless yet kind of slightly cold look, ask in a distant and you could say disrespectful tone, why should I? You know, have faith. My response to God was always, why should I? And if that's you, that's okay. God has never gotten angry at me for not trusting him, for questioning him. He's not an insecure tyrant that will get angry at the slightest challenge to his authority. He's the most patient and loving father, ready to answer your questions. In fact, he wants you to question him, even wrestle with him. Because questions and doubts are not a symptom of weak faith. it's actually the path to more faith. As you question more, he will answer you more. And God promises that too, right? And then the more you will know him. And the more you know him, the more you're prepared to walk with him. Get a bit closer and a bit closer, like Wonky. And the more you know him and the more you walk with him, the more you will trust him. And then the more faith you will have. That's the kind of like process. And so when the Bible says have faith, it's not a challenge to strive more, to believe really hard, to get what you want, right? No, it's an invitation to get to know God, to enter an intimate relationship with him, so you can know what he wants for you. And he only wants the best for you. And after you find your security, your identity, your belonging in God, that provides the foundation and safety net for you to take down your walls and let go of whatever anger and resentment may be there and start to oppose the instincts to withdraw from other people, which gives you the free security and the freedom to be yourself, to love and be loved, to re-establish relationships with the people who once hurt you, assuming they are willing to work on that relationship as well. It's kind of like an armor that God gives you, because you don't need to look for validation and security elsewhere. So when you try to form connections with people or re-establish connections that were lost, and some of them will reject you again, it doesn't have to hurt you in the same way as if you didn't have God as your like foundation, right? And it just sets you up in a really good spot to re-engage people, the people who should be close to you. If for me it was my mum, right, who hurt me a lot, and then but with the foundation of God we could like work on it, and it gave her space to make mistakes, because no one's perfect and no one can get it straight away. So she still like said really hurtful things in the beginning of us reconnecting our relationship, but because I had God, I still hurt, but I was able to be like, this is not this, it's bad, but it's not fatal. And that's where we want to be, right? And it gives you space to make mistakes and gives other people space to make mistakes. And giving people space to make mistakes is actually giving them space to grow. And that includes for yourself too. That's it. Any questions?